Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. Wanted to give my thoughts on DDO in 2015 as a whole. I'm going to go through each update, give my summary of this year, and how I think it compares to prior years in the game. Let's start with the first update of the year, which was Update 25, the Reign of Elemental Evil. This update brought us the Temple of Elemental Evil, which is the second pen and paper classic module to be introduced into DDO. Players, of course, were overjoyed when the Temple was announced because Haunted Halls was such a big hit. People loved Haunted Halls. Haunted Halls was a classic pen and paper module that a lot of players played in pen and paper, so to see a rendition of that in DDO was just awesome. Haunted Halls had a great design map. It had so many cool pen and paper aspects in it that just there's such a big nostalgia factor to it. Unfortunately, I'm going to start off this video with not the most positive of reviews. I think Temple of Elemental Evil, unfortunately, was a flop with the player base. Now, the Temple of Elemental Evil did a few things really well. I think what it did the best was its map. Temple of Elemental Evil is two huge quests, Part 1 and Part 2, and these are the biggest maps we've seen in DDO. And if you're the type of player that likes to explore and flower sniff, these are quests for you. There's so much to little nooks and crannies to find and see. Unfortunately, the temple had two big problems which caused it to be a flop. The first one is the temple was overly repetitive. Unlike Haunted Halls that had a lot of cool traps, pen and paper aspects to it, the temple just didn't. The temple was huge and there really weren't any interesting puzzles in there. There were no interesting traps. There was no interesting optionals. We saw straight hack and slash in this dungeon, and for a dungeon that is so huge, we needed more mix-ups than that. To me, I found the quest unfortunately very boring. It was cool to go through and see the whole map the first time through, but after that it was just a lot of going into a room and killing stuff, going to another room, killing stuff, and so on for hours. The other problem the temple had was there was no incentive to grind out the Temple of Elemental Evil weapons, which was supposed to be the big draw of this pack. The Temple of Elemental Evil weapons did not outclass Tier 3 Thunderforged, so there was no real reason for a lot of players to go after Temple of Elemental Evil weapons because they had already grinded out and obtained their Tier 3 Thunderforged weapons. There's a few other incentives, I'll give it credit. There's some other name loot that a lot of people liked. There was also some tomes in the inn chest that you could grind out, which were the highest in the game at that point. But overall, there wasn't a lot there to grind out, and at this point in the game, there was no. I know players differ, but for a lot of players, there was no epic elite difficulty hard enough to justify this kind of grind. A lot of players did not have problems completing the hardest epic elite difficulty that the game had to offer with their current weapons. So even if Temple of Elemental Evil weapons were better somehow than Tier 3 Thunderforged, they still weren't necessary to get through the content. And I know I don't want to sound elitist here. I know a lot of players do really struggle in Epic Elite content, and that's fine, but my point still stands that you could still complete and work towards that Epic Elite content with your Thunderforged weapons and still stand just as good of a chance. So there really was no reason to really grind Temple of Elemental Evil, so I don't think it created that in-game that the developers obviously wanted it to be, at least to hold players over until the end of 2015 when we got the epic version of the Shroud that was planned. We also saw a enhancement rework for rogues in this update, which I think got some really positive reviews and some kind of so-so reviews. I know a lot of Assassin players were a little upset at what they did with the Assassin ADCs and how they reworked that. But where I saw a lot of players really happy with this and where I think developers did a really good job was the Mechanic class. Mechanics had been, up to this point, just not very competitive, but this update changed all that. I believe this update also started introducing some love for great crossbows. We actually saw great crossbows being addressed in loot. Now, this could have, I don't remember exactly, this might have been a later update, but we saw this year great crossbows really get some love, and up to this point they've been ignored as a weapon type. but they're definitely viable now, and mechanics are a great class, whereas they a great enhancement tree where it was not so much before. Let's move on to the next update, which was update 26, which I think was the best update of the year so far. Now, the newest update is still kind of new, so I can't really say, but of the updates we've been experiencing so far in 2015, I think that this was the best. Warlocks Legacy Update 26, of course, brought us Warlocks, which is was a new class in DDO this year. Warlocks are a mix between archers and sorcerers, basically. And a lot of players, myself included, really hate managing your SP, but Warlocks brought us an option of a caster / range character where you didn't rely on spell points. You had your Eldritch Blast, which you can use indefinitely. Warlocks also have a lot of diversity. You can build a bursting warlock, you can build a pew pew warlock that shoots from afar, you can build a melee warlock. So there's a lot of variation there, and I think the warlock did a good job converting a well-known and loved pen and paper class to DDO, and it really has worked out well. I see all kinds of warlocks running around the game still, so it's a class that a lot of people are having fun with. Let's move on to update 27, which was the Trials of the Archons. The Trials of the Archons introduced 3 new quests: the Archon's Trial, Demon Assault, and the Devil's Details. This was a new update to Shavrath. I was very excited for this update, and a lot of other players were as well, because Shavrath is just such well-known epic content in DDO. When I mean epic, I don't mean technically epic, I just mean it's epic. Shavrath, the original Shavrath pack, was loved for a long time. It was endgame when cap was 20. The Tower of Despair is one of the, probably, I would say, the second most loved and successful raid in the game, aside from the Shroud. So when we saw a new Shavrath pack, people were excited. I was excited. I was really looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I think this was an okay update. It's good for what it is, but unfortunately, the developers didn't seem to really put a lot of time into this update. At least I don't know that for a fact, but that's what it seemed like to me. The content's, it's okay. It's kind of short though. The 3 quests are all short. They're pretty straightforward. I think the artwork is really great in these quests, but they're all kind of short, straightforward. It seemed like this was an update that they wanted to get out quickly rather than spend months and months and months working on a huge update. This just wasn't meant to be a huge update. We did see a raid though to Fire of the Just, which was very cool. We hadn't gotten a raid in 2015 until this point. So it was great to see that. The newest raid up to this point was still Mark of Death. Fire of the Just, it's shorter than I would like it to be, but it's still a pretty fun raid. In this pack, the loot was good, the XP was good. So even though I don't think this is very complex content, it's still worth running for XP, and the loot's still pretty good. Now, I kind of understood this would be a quick update, and it wasn't really something they put tons of time into like they did, obviously, the original Shavrath content, which you can tell they put tons of work into that. They've got an adventure area in that pack. We've got really long, complex quests, and we've got a very complex raid in Tower of the Despair. And this update just didn't have that, and that's not so much a bad thing. It was just meant to be a shorter update. You can't really compare this to the original Shavrath content. Obviously, the older Shavrath content's better, at least in my opinion. I know that's really an opinion, but I feel like the older Shavrath content, just more man hours were put into it than were put in this update. So it's not a bad update by any means. It's okay. The quests are fun, decently fun. They're just short and kind of simple, but it is what it is. It was meant to be kind of an appetizer to update 29, where we would get the new epified versions of some of these classic raids. It really wasn't meant to be a huge update. It was just meant to be a small update. At least that's what it seemed like to me. So for what it is, it was an okay update. Let's move on to update 28, the Devils Gambit, which was basically followed the same formula. At least it seemed like that to me. It was not meant to be a huge update. This, again, was more of an appetizer to update 29. So the Devil's Gambit was not, at least to me, did not seem to really be endgame content. It was high level content, but it's really short. It's not complex. There's not a lot to it. We did see 4 quests, and the one cool thing about the quests is they take place in all kinds of different areas in Eberron. We have a quest that's in the Hall of Heroes. We have a quest that's in the Harbor. We have a quest that's in the 12, and we have another quest that is in House C. So they're all across Eberron. That was a very cool thing. They actually were designed very much like Trials of the Archons. They're, again, simple quests, short, good XP though, good loot. We also saw in this update, we saw some Ranger revamps. Now, I haven't played a Ranger since the revamps. I do have one Ranger character, Archer character, but I have not played him much since the update, so I can't give him much an opinion, but it seems to be decently received by the player base. I've seen some positive, some negative, so it's good that this class was addressed at least and did get some love. Now let's move on to an event we got in Update 28, the Night Revels, and I think this was, other than Warlocks, the other biggest highlight of the year. This was a huge success. I love this. A lot of players love this. The Night Revels finally brought back Maybar, kind of. Maybar, of course, was the original graveyard event that we used to get every Halloween, but because of some performance issues, specifically with the Shadow Dragon raid part of Maybar, we got Night Revels instead, which was a rework of it. So we got the same Slayer area basically as Maybar, but instead of getting the Shadow Dragon raid, we got challenge versions of some older quests. So they took some harbor quests like Kobold's New Ringleader, I believe, one from the Shrine Syndicate chain, and they took the Snitch as well, just a few older quests, and they made short challenge versions of them. And I found it to be a lot of fun. This was a very social event for me. This is the type of event where you log in with some of your friends, some of your guildies, you go into the Slayer area, you just chat and you kill stuff, and you slowly grind towards what you want. And there's a good sense of accomplishments in events like this because you can pick out what you want, and you can slowly progress to it. And there's a very satisfying feeling in progressing towards what you want. And there's still some very good loot here. We saw some spooky tomes that stacked with all other tomes. So that was something that was very worthy of being grinded out. We had +2 spooky. We had +2. I'm sorry, I said tomes. I meant to say augments. We had +2 spooky augments. I think there was one for wisdom and one for intelligence. So that was something for a lot of characters. And we still had all the old Maybar loot, which is still worth grinding out. We had some other goodies there. So there was something for everybody, I think, here. It may have not been they didn't add stuff like level 30 versions of Maybar loot, but there was still some good loot here to grind out. So there's stuff here if you wanted it. Next, let's move on to Update 29, which it was the last update of the year, which was the Codex War. And this update just dropped a couple weeks ago, so it's still too early to give an overall opinion on it. And this was meant to be, and it definitely was, the capstone update of the year. For me, this was the one I was looking forward to all year because we saw a ton of stuff here. We saw a level cap increase to 30. We saw a new line of legendary feats that you get at level 30. We saw new legendary content, which legendary now refers to content above, which I believe is level 31 and above. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. We got 2 new quests to Curse the Sky and Creeping Death. We also finally got epified, you call legendary now, legendary versions of the Shroud, Tempest Spine, and the Hound of Zoriat, which are 3 classic raids. The Shroud in particular is my favorite raid in the entire game, so I've had a fun time playing that so far. Well, minus the first few days when the update was out where we had some unfortunate lag problems, but since then it seems to be working pretty well. I'm glad that there doesn't seem to be too many long withstanding lag issues. They did a really good job of keeping the Shroud true to what it was and what we loved. back when cap was 20. They didn't change much. They changed the encounter at the end a little bit, but the core essence of the raid stayed the same, and the core mechanics in legendary greenstone crafting stayed the same as heroic greenstone crafting. They did make some changes, like we have augments now instead of what we had in heroics, which basically was upgrading the weapon itself. You can now detach the augments from the weapon, so it's a little bit different, but it's basically the same. We also saw the return of green steel items. So we've got a lot of stuff to grind out here. It's too early for me to give an opinion on how good these weapons are, or how sufficient the legendary content is. It's just too new. Another thing we saw with this update, of course, is the random loot revamp. Random loot was changed dramatically. For a long time in DDO, for the past, at least the past several years, loot you see in chests has been trash almost all the time, unless you are a brand new player. For a lot of players, me in particular, especially me, hardly even looked at random loot. I got to a point where I didn't even pick it up because I didn't even feel it was worth the inventory headache. So I didn't even look at or pick up random loot. I didn't even bother selling it for platinum. So this definitely changed that. Competitively, random loot now is up there. It definitely competes now with some of the named items, and yes, we saw a lot of named items seem to get overshadowed with this random loot change, and I'm seeing some comments from the community about that, but I'm also seeing a lot of positive comments from players who are overjoyed about this, because it finally gives you a reason to look in chests. And that's, if you think about it, in pen and paper, that's one of the cool things. That's why you go through the dungeon, to get the stuff, to get to the chest. So giving us reasons to actually look into chests, and indirectly giving buffs to characters like rogues who can pick locks is a really cool thing. And I think while the jury is still out on the power level of the random loot, if it's appropriate, there's still definitely a lot of there's a valid argument going on about that, which has not been resolved. It definitely was a change in the right direction. So guys, that's my thoughts overall on this year, 2015 in DDO. As a year as a whole, I think it was an average year in DDO. I don't think it was a bad year, but I don't think it was a good year. We saw some great stuff like the Warlock class and the Night Revels event, but we also saw some disappointments like the Temple of Elemental Evil, and we saw a few kind of just okay updates like Trials of the Yukon and Devils Gambit. So overall, I have to say it's not as good as some prior years, but it's definitely better than some other years. So it's an average year. It was decent for me, and I'm really looking forward to what the developers are bringing us in 2016. So, guys, please comment below. Let me know what you thought of this year. If you thought it was a great year, if you thought it was a disappointing year, if you disagree with me on some of the statements I made, like the Temple of Elemental Evil and the Night Revels and the Warlock opinions I had. Just let me know what you think, if you think I'm nuts or if you agree with me. As always, guys, please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and please throw me a like. You can also catch me on Twitch, streaming, normally on Fridays, although I haven't been doing that as much lately, but normally I do try to stream on Fridays around 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can also find me streaming periodically, so just follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Axel311. That's all for this video, guys. You all have a good one, and I'll see you next video.